Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to help you to open your mind, get curious about yourself and raise your consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and become the conscious creator of your life. I am your host, Karen Maloney, and I work as an inside-out coach, mentor and guide, helping women to revolutionize their internal chatter and create a life they love. Listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you choose. And be sure to like, subscribe, review, and share the podcast. Check out my website as well, soulpowerlight.com, for more info. Hello everybody. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. It is me, Karen Maloney, and I am delighted to have you back and to have another wonderful episode for you today. And as we are halfway through the year now, we've 6 months down, 6 months to go, I decided to connect with Lionnet to join and to share with us what is going on in the skies, what has been going on, where are we at, and what can we expect going forward. So that's essentially what this episode is about. Lionnet is a professional astrologer, lecturer, transformational life coach, and best-selling author. Her books on astrology, tarot, coaching, and relationships have been translated into 11 languages. Annie sees clients both in private practice and at a monthly detox retreat, which specialises in holistic health and well-being. She is passionate about helping others to grow into their fullness and live their best lives. I really loved this conversation with Annie. It's expansive, it's insightful, and it's supportive if we take the information and put it into action. So she talks about the skies, what's going on, what has been going on. And I, for one, just definitely found it so informative. Like that, I like to know, because even as Annie spoke about, it's not always pleasant when you're looking ahead and looking at the skies and seeing the conjunctions that are coming and the challenges and the fears and the difficulties that can bring up. And it's not to be spreading fear, but it's to help us to better resource ourselves and to work through the times and to do the work that we're being asked collectively to do, and to move out of that fear and more back into our shared humanity and that compassion for others, even if they have a differing opinion to us. So again, lots in this conversation about the current astrological signatures, what it's reflecting back to us, the fear in the collective, what is dismantling and dissolving now. And even as Annie mentioned at one stage in the conversation, there is no going back. There is no going back. These have been fundamental shifts that we're going through, and we can't just patch things back together as they were. That's not what we're going through, and that's not what we're being asked. And she really touched on how we're all being asked as well to really find our truth and use our discernment in and throughout this shift and transition, and this time really of a lot of misinformation as well. So again, a beautiful, empowering conversation. Annie is fabulous to talk to, and if anyone would like to connect with Annie or get their natal chart read, and I highly recommend it, getting a blueprint of the totality of who they are. Annie's new website is currently under construction, but you can email her at Lionnet, that's Lionnet, Lionnet.astro@gmail.com. So enjoy this conversation and take whatever action is necessary to resource and support you during these transitioning times. And as always as well, reach out. I'm currently taking on a few more coaching clients for July, and it's one-to-one, and it is doing this inner work that we're all being asked to do now, so supporting you through that. So feel free to check out my website, soulpowerlight.com, click the work with me section, or send me an email, karen@soulpowerlight.com. So enjoy this episode, and as always, all the details will be shared on the show notes on the podcast section on my website, soulpowerlight.com. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. And today I have another wonderful guest with me. Annie, first of all, you're very welcome and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to today's conversation to give us some information and maybe a little heads up or how we can best support ourselves. You're an astrologer among many other things, but mainly we'll be looking at some astrology today, which I'm really excited about. But maybe just first as a little background, what was it that brought you to astrology?
It was, I don't believe in coincidences. It sort of presented as a very random invitation. Somebody I met a long time ago just mentioned that they knew an astrologer and they'd had a reading with this person and they found it really helpful. And might I be interested? And I don't think I would have sought that out at that point in my life. I wasn't really focused on that at all, but my curiosity was piqued. So I said, yes, okay. So I went along and I was absolutely stunned by how much this person could tell me about myself.
Wow.
It was just like a believing mirror this person was holding up to me. And I felt like that's me and he sees me. And I felt so kind of affirmed. And I knew in that session that's what I wanted to do. I had an absolute aha moment, like this is for me.
Wow.
I want to be an astrologer. I want to do this for people.
Wow, that's brilliant. I love that. And I totally agree with you. I don't believe there are any coincidences either. So I love that you followed that curiosity and had that aha moment. So now you can bring your gifts and talents as you have been to the masses. And, we've obviously been through a very different and challenging and transitioning year and a half. And I'd love for you to share kind of what's going on in the skies at the moment and what's important for us to be aware of.
Absolutely. So there are some very, very powerful astrological signatures that are current, and they really are absolutely reflecting back to us what's happening in society right now, not least the pandemic, but kind of address different things. But obviously that's the kind of the overarching kind of challenge that we're facing on a global level. And that began way back in January 2020. So we were just getting an inkling then that there was something going on in China. And as astrologers, obviously, we knew about this particular Saturn-Pluto conjunction coming in. And this is always very kind of dramatic kind of signature. And it often pushes us into issues around survival. It showed up at different times, in the late 1920s, 1930, coincided with the Wall Street crash, when people feel like they're not going to survive. There's a hugely threatening kind of quality to that energy. And here it is, there's this huge kind of fear in the collective now. Everyone thinks they're going to die. I know that sounds rather kind of exaggerated, but I think on some level we are all in flight fright in response to this. However much we can rationalize it, there is that kind of primal response to something that is perceived as life-threatening, and obviously it can be. So there's that, and also just the way that we're perceiving our freedoms being sort of curtailed. So this kind of idea of kind of how power is used and how control is used, and our whole relationship with authority, that's also very much in the collective as well. So I'd love to talk about psychologically what that means for the individual. I'm kind of just presenting it now as a kind of mundane astrology. We're all affected by this. Whatever's going on in our individual birth charts, we're all subsumed, by this one particular life event.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And thank you for sharing that much. And again, every time I connect or hear about astrology like that, I've been fascinated for a long time, but I've never studied it or looked deep into it. I had my birth chart done, many, many years ago. I don't even remember or know where it is, but it's it's just fascinating how, like you even mentioned, how all astrologers knew that something was coming, a shift or a major conjunction that was going to bring up these different issues, threatening, the fear in the collective, the power and control and the authority. So I just find it so incredibly fascinating. And yes, if you can enlighten or share how that may come down to an individual level, or what we're being called to look at within ourselves during these times as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's several things here, and it will, but the way that we all respond to this will obviously vary hugely on one level, depending on our mindset, and also our personality. But so some of us have this deep distrust in authority, which is a very Saturn-Pluto kind of signature. And so, there's a whole swathe of people who don't even buy into the narrative because they don't believe it. They're suspicious of what is this? Where does it come from? So all that questioning and deep distrust is one of the sort of Saturn-Pluto themes. And it's what you do with that. We have another running concurrently with the Saturn-Pluto. We have a Uranus-Saturn square. And Uranus and Saturn are kind of antithetical. Saturn is very much about establishment, the status quo, and Uranus is a kind of revolutionary energy. It wants to kind of overthrow the kind of existing sort of established norms and challenge and kind of question. So there's those two sort of planetary major sort of aspects running together are kind of really creating this huge tension. So you have this massive polarity of people who are aligned with this is what we're supposed to do, and if you're not doing that, you're irresponsible, you're morally reprehensible. And then there's the people who are like, don't even think about following those guidelines. You have to sort of find your own truth, and you have to kind of inform yourself so that you don't just assume that everything you're being told is the truth. So finding the truth, is very, very hard to do. And we're in a culture now of misinformation anyway. So it's very much down to the individual, so really the invitation is, how do you live in your own truth? How do you sit in your own authority? How do you really find a way of being in charge of yourself so that you feel that you have some autonomy and the ability to make your own choices within a culture where there is a lot of our freedoms are being taken away?
Wow. Yes. I think that's definitely a word to describe at the moment, that tension and polarity. And it does come down to finding our own truth. And I think that discernment and that, like you mentioned, autonomy as well, and knowing what's true for us is vital for us all as well going forward. And I know you mentioned, and obviously this has been an issue that has been ongoing for the last, year and a half, as I said, but also has been written in the skies, for want of a better word. But is it, and I know you mentioned that Saturn-Pluto conjunction back January 2020, is it still as prevalent today, or are there different energies or shifts coming up at the moment?
So the Saturn-Pluto conjunction has separated now. The Saturn-Uranus square is exact as we speak. So but the legacy of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is we're very much still in the thrall of that energy, even though it's technically not conjunct anymore. They're not conjunct anymore. So one of the signatures of Saturn-Pluto is basically hard times, which often reflects as economic depression or collapse of some kind. And I really don't want to be a harbinger of gloom. It's very difficult with astrology because, you can see the tough signatures and you don't want to gloss over them, but you also want to see, well, as you said, what does that mean for us? How do we actually meet this challenge, and what resources do we have, in order not just to survive, but to find a creative and sort of basically more ingenious way of living our lives, because we can't maintain the old normal has really kind of broken down now. So trying to attach ourselves or to what we knew before is probably a waste of energy now. And because Saturn and Jupiter are both in Aquarius, there is a whole sense here of needing to kind of reinvent the way we live.
I love that. And yeah, you mentioned there can be hard times and shifts and changes and the collapse of the old and things like that. And yeah, they are scary. And, but for me, I think it comes between the difference of, living the old kind of sleepwalking through life way or a more awakened state of being, because it's not about glossing over the darkness or what's coming or the challenges. For me, it's about, well, forewarned is forearmed, and having a bit of an idea, it helps us to, again, and it's not about living in fear and working from a place of fear, but going, okay, I know this is happening, so what can I do to best support myself and move through it and grow and evolve and expand, so I don't get completely and utterly floored about it. And that always comes back to, the inner work and having these tools at our disposal, so we don't find ourselves just in a moment of panic going, oh, what do I do now? And I love that, you mentioned as well, it is a waste of our energy attaching to what was before. And I think if we lead with a little bit of curiosity to see, well, how else can things be? What are the possibilities? What are the other opportunities or the new ways of being? And I'm really curious as well from your work, how are you constantly like looking at maps? Is it all online now? How far ahead do you look? What are some of the energies that are coming?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say that we've had a very brief sort of glimpse of Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter went into Aquarius a few months ago, but it just zoomed through Aquarius, and then briefly it's gone into Pisces, and it will go back into Aquarius for the rest of the year at the end of July, and then back into Pisces at the end of 2022. But it's a really good counterpoint, because we've been talking about these very, very heavy energies and this sense of, this prevalence of fear and how that, how we kind of contract and also, how in response to fear, and, that part of us that it sort of shuts down and isn't able to really creatively respond to all the ways in which we can use this time, to grow and evolve, as you said. But Jupiter in Pisces is giving us a sense of our shared humanity and the kind of bigger picture of what happens if we kind of open up to the other dimensions and the different levels of so that we're not just in that kind of dense 3D sort of state, and obviously with Jupiter and Pisces, we need to do things like meditate and be in the beauty of nature and find meaning to our lives, and not just kind of, work with the very literal sort of things that are coming in through our TVs and our radio sets. If we're just tuning into that reality, we're not open to all the other sources of inspiration and creativity and the way, that capacity to envision a bigger life that sort of goes beyond the current challenges. And that's the opportunity that's running concurrently.
Wow, I love that. And, that's like the great opportunity as well, and the creating of the new. But, I know how it gets as well, and certainly how I used to live my life. I told myself, oh, I was so busy. I was so busy that I didn't take the time to meditate, to stop, to actually even dream about what I wanted or how I wanted my life to look or how I envisioned my life being. And, that's crucial now to have that vision. And if we have the support in the skies as well to do that, I think it's a really important time. And it's actually what we're all being asked to do. It is really to slow down, to connect back to ourselves, to nature, to each other, to humanity as a whole, to really be curious and look at how we've been living and seeing, has it been sustainable? Has it been supportive? Has it been really uplifting and beneficial to ourselves and the whole planet? So I think it's exactly what we're all being asked. And I love that you mentioned that as well, meditating and envisioning that big life and, coming from the skies as well. That's exactly where we're at.
It is. And this does take, courage and the willingness to kind of risk certain things. I mean, the leap of faith, there's the archetypal leap of faith is something which we can only do from that place we're in when we're in a state of trust, or when we have that kind of sense that, I can't stay where I am. It's actually too scary to stay where I am. It's much more frightening than to just risk going into the unknown in some way, whatever that means for each of us individually. Whatever it is where we're daring to sort of go beyond our known universe, and that's that would be different for all of us. But that's the invitation to be really fluid, because particularly the Saturn Uranus, it's very intransigent. It's that stuck sense of people very much rooted in their own positions, and that's usually a fear-based position. And so, whereas the Pisces, is much more fluid, much more receptive, much more open, much more trusting.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it does come down to, that leap of faith and that trusting ourselves. But again, it ties into, well, for me, the bigger picture of looking beyond just ourselves as well. And like you mentioned, that dense 3D world, and that does come through having some kind of practices and tools that support us so we can take that leap of faith. We can have the trust and faith that, life is always supporting me. There is a bigger picture at play. This could be the start of something brand new, but it's moving through that fear as well, and that is the leap of faith.
Exactly. And, if we're not resourced enough, it's very hard to do that, which is why we're all being asked to step up, and wake up more to what is required. Because, I think it's very easy when times are good, we tend to kind of coast a bit. And this is a time where we can't really afford. I had a dream a few months ago where I was literally asleep at the wheel. I was driving and I was kind of asleep, and I thought it was such a sort of perfect sort of metaphor for you can't afford to do that. There's this, and I think that if we're going to, I mean, that the other conjunction that we had with the Saturn Jupiter in Aquarius is talking about social innovation, and the Jupiter in Pisces is the kind of whole collaborative. We have where is our shared humanity, and it's very hard sometimes to see that. If you're just basing your observations on what's going on in the world, we don't see that much of that. Certainly not in the way that the news is coming in. So it's like, how do we do that in our own, how can we be kind and compassionate with ourselves and with each other? And even if somebody is expressing an opinion which is so different to yours, how can you sit with that person and at least be, receptive, even if you don't agree with them? Because the problem with the Saturn Uranus is that everyone is kind of, we're getting into that sort of us and them mentality, which is really sort of pernicious and damaging.
Yeah. Well, we can see it separates even more, having that rage and that inability to just listen or allow someone to have a different opinion. We really got into difficult times with that, and kind of the idea that no, there's just one way and that's it, and anyone else who falls outside of that, well, you deserve to be silenced or criticized or whatever. Whereas that is the bigger picture of waking up and self-responsibility and that maturity as well, and knowing that, well, there'll always be different opinions, but that's okay as well sometimes. And, it's like you mentioned, waking up to what is required of us. And it does come back to our own resourcefulness as well. It's not necessarily the resources we have, but it's our own resourcefulness within ourselves to, like that, sit with opposing thoughts or ideas, to support ourselves as well. So is there anything else going on in the moment in the skies, or what's coming up that we can, I suppose, look towards for, I don't know, the next 6 months or the next year, or what's happening there?
Yes. Well, we just had a couple of eclipses, which always heighten the energy. So we had a new moon eclipse and then a full moon eclipse, and coming in next week. And so that's kind of accentuating and magnifying all the issues of this time. And, it feels like, again, it's very much about how we respond to these energies. I mean, most of us aren't necessarily consciously registering what's going on up in the sky. Most of us don't look up in that way and find necessarily meaning to that. But I think on some sort of visceral level, we are sentient beings, and we are sensitive, and we are registering different kind of energies, even if we're not consciously acknowledging those. So I think there's the fact that we're in an eclipse season and the fact that this is kind of heightening either our flight fright or particularly our flight fright, I think, and the fact that we all want certainty. I mean, certainly in England, we all want to know, when is this going to end? When will we have our kind of liberty back? And this whole sort of eclipse energy, particularly the solar eclipse a couple of weeks ago, is saying we can't be certain of anything. And so where do we find within ourselves the capacity to not have all the answers or not know, but not let that sort of unhinge us, And so that's where some kind of practice, I think this is where the Jupiter in Pisces is sort of flagging up. We're much more able to kind of meet to that not knowing if we have something in us which can root us to the center of our own being. And that takes work, obviously. That's the discipline of not relying on external sort of sources all the time to inform how we feel. That it's basically an inside job, and that's what this is, the kind of synthesis of the planetary alignments at the moment, are just putting the onus back on us. And yes, of course, as a collective, we all have to wake up and make different choices, but ultimately it's very much about how do we as individuals do that.
Yeah, I love that. And it is, absolutely. And it's that thing of being comfortable with what's uncomfortable. And I think, like you mentioned, when we do wake up, we realize, well, the external is always uncertain. We just didn't want to see it before because maybe there wasn't any massive shakeup, and we had this plan and idea of this is how my life is going to go, and this is exactly the pathway. And then it was all pulled asunder for a lot of people. And that's the truth about living from the external and based off externals and looking for everything from the external. It's extremely shaky ground. So it is that inside job of how do I find certainty, that peace, that comfort with what's uncomfortable, that comfort with the unknown within myself, and that truly
Absolutely.
is for me as well. That's been my journey. I think that is part of the human journey of why we're here. Once we start to shift that focus from like that, the purely external, it's not saying there's anything wrong with the external, absolutely not. But if we live our lives and who we are and everything based off of it, if tragedy happens or something like this happens and everything's shaken up, well, we're totally lost within that. And I think it's finding our ground again amongst all that, because when we do connect back to who we are and that self-autonomy and what's true for us, it really connects us more to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet as a whole. So I love that you shared that as well. And what's your hope, or what do you envision for where we are going in the future?
I think ultimately, I mean, I'm looking way ahead here, but I was just scanning through the ephemeris today, and in 2025, Neptune goes into Aries, and I was thinking that perhaps we need 2 or 3 years to kind of, I mean, it's a little bit like that sense that you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. And that, we can't just kind of patch everything back together now and see, there's fundamentally, it won't, the structure won't hold anymore. And that's what the Saturn Pluto ultimately is about. That what isn't working now that will collapse. And so I think my hope is that more and more people individually will take greater responsibility for themselves and for their place in society, and that will create a kind of momentum, and that then there will be a tipping point, and a bit like the 100 monkey syndrome, where more and more of us will emulate the higher sort of states, a bit like the Maslow pyramid, those high states of gratitude and joy and love and compassion, and that we can somehow connect with those, even if we're not feeling them all the time. We have to up our frequency, and that's our individual responsibility. And the collaboration and community, that's the Aquarius, age of Aquarius that we're in now, that we have to find some way of working together, because the polarity that's happening now is, I think it's going to become more and more apparent that the old way isn't working. And we just have to allow for that to just sort of disintegrate, whilst we can't, otherwise it's that thing of trying to sort of build on as you said, on a shaky foundation. We need to start with a very, very different sort of sense of how we're going to build from the roots up now.
Yeah. And again, for me, it's the bigger picture as well of, well, I suppose once you're on a healing journey and do the inner work, you realize that you have to see it to heal it. So the fact that all this is coming up, all these, kind of hidden parts of society and all this darkness and polarity, like you mentioned, is rising to the surface. And often, it has to get worse before it gets better, because it has to be seen. We all have to wake up to what's been kind of going on subliminally or just under the radar that we didn't want to see because we were so busy just getting on with life and thinking everything was great and we just want our own success and money and whatever, that they do have to come up. That's the way that things change, like you mentioned as well. We have to see them to heal them. And it's about building the new as well, and not fighting against the old, just going, like you mentioned, it's allowing it to disintegrate, going, oh yeah, that really did not work. So what's going to work? Being more collaborative and community going forward. And I laughed that you mentioned the 100th monkey story. I was only talking about this with my brother like over the weekend. And for anyone who doesn't know that story, or that little, I can't remember where it was exactly, but essentially these monkeys, I don't know if they were on an island and they couldn't get food, so they were dropping in food and it was all dirty. And one monkey all of a sudden started washing his food, and next thing another monkey started, and then after the 100th monkey, they all started washing their food before eating it. But the funny thing is, it wasn't just in that one place. The monkeys all around the world started doing it. And that's the collective consciousness. That is the truth of how we are all connected. So as I was saying to my brother over the weekend, I was like, well, I'm sticking to my path and my work, because all it takes is that critical mass. All it takes is a certain amount of people for everything to shift, for the consciousness to shift globally. So
exactly.
Exactly.
So that's the hope. Yes, that's right. So we need to really hold that very high vision and do our part, play our part, knowing that the more of us play our part, the bigger the impact.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly it. That's the truth of it, as in we all have to take responsibility now. It doesn't matter who's doing what or who's not doing what. It's about us stepping up, going, well, I'm going to do the inner work. I'm going to connect back to my truth. I'm going to be that person that can hold space for another, even though it's a contrasting opinion or whatever it is. It's that part of it that's we're all being asked. And the more people that do their little bit and their daily practice, whatever it is, of being quiet, being still, meditating, being in nature, to help build that connection to the higher part of us, that spirit aspect of us, that soul. Like, we are not just a human, we are a spirit having a human experience. And the more people remember that, is going to help the shift as well. So I'm one of those people, I definitely live with that faith and the hope, and it gets really hard sometimes. I think even harder the more awake and aware you are and responsible you are, but it's worth it. and I believe in it. So
Yes.
I love that you shared that as well. Really interesting as well. And I'm wondering what's your favorite aspect of your work?
My favorite aspect of my work, I think it's the whole sense of sharing with someone their blueprint, so that they actually get to see the sort of the totality of who they are. Because so many of us identify with a part of ourselves that might not even be the part of us that's most authentic, and often other parts of ourselves are kind of under wraps for whatever reason. And just because your birth chart kind of gives you a whole 360-degree perspective on yourself, it's that sense of seeing people kind of grow into the fullness of who they are, and it's the greatest joy, really. I mean, there's no greater joy really than being yourself. And I think very few of us, have that experience, and it's astrology is the only way I know that enables people to have that whole sense of themselves. So that's my favorite aspect. And it's not always, it can be challenging because there are parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at, particularly our shadow side. But there's a cost to not experiencing the all of who we are. And so I like to sort of see people do their inner work and then sort of feel the liberation of being an authentic person.
Wow. Powerful. How amazing. And to help someone see the totality of who they are and having your birth chart read is super powerful. And, for people who maybe haven't had it done before or they don't know what's involved, like what is necessary? Is it just a thing of your date of birth and time of birth? Or what if you don't have time of birth?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people actually don't have their time of birth. It depends. If there's an absolutely no idea what time of birth time is, then you have to kind of do a sort of what we call a flat chart, where you do a chart for midday. You can still see an awful lot, but it's not the whole picture. Some people there are lots of family stories often where people say, well, I know I was born around tea time, or my dad had just got back from work, or my mum was just about to have breakfast. So sometimes you can narrow it right down and rectify it, especially when you're in conversation with the client, because it becomes apparent. There is something called the ascendant, which is really what is determined by the time. And for example, if it's a dilemma between if you're a Sagittarius ascendant or a Capricorn, it's so obvious that the person will be one or the other because they're all so different. So I've kind of over the years of being in practice, I can usually get to the true ascendant, providing there is some kind of ballpark.
Amazing. And what a super interesting conversation as well. And thanks for sharing today. And just
thank you.
Curious as well to know, what is your best practice that supports you as well in staying kind of grounded and connected and aligned to yourself?
Well, I am absolutely passionate about health and well-being. I work at this holistic detox retreat. So I have a lot of rituals and practices that I do around self-care. I've got the moon in Taurus, so I'm very much about the body and how that, when I nourish my body, I always feel amazing. And, then I do meditate and I do yoga and I love the beauty of nature. But I think the fundamental thing is what I put in my body. That seems to kind of give me the clearest, most kind of, mellow state.
I love it. Yeah. So important. So important.
So it is.
Yeah. And Annie, thank you so much. And if there's anything else that you're feeling called to share before we wrap up today that can help us, or any other insights or that. But other than that, I know you're working on your new website, but please share maybe a way that people can connect with you if they wish to do so.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my website is still kind of under construction, but I have an email address, and that's the way most people contact me. So my email address is Lionnet, which is my surname, which is Lion, Lion, and then Net. So Lionnet, LIONNET.astro@gmail.com. So that's it'd be lovely to hear from anybody who feels moved to look at their birth chart at this point in time.
Fantastic, really powerful work. And again, just such a pleasure, and thank you for joining, and thank you for informing us a little bit more of what we've been going through, what the skies have been showing us, and going forward, what we're being asked to do more of as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website www.soulpowerlight.com.